The federal government has committed $2 billion to what will be the mammoth task of rebuilding entire towns that have been devastated by the bushfires. Over 2 years, a national bushfire agency will coordinate resources, providing support and services to those who've been affected by the blazes. But some people on the ground say more immediate relief is needed. Political reporter Eliza Lashon has more from Canberra.
From the top end of the country, help is on its way. But in the middle of a disaster zone, providing relief is rarely easy. Cockpit vision from this RAAF aircraft shows how treacherous rescue missions can be when even the best laid plans to evacuate Mallacoota thwarted by Mother Nature.
It's not possible to fly in or out of Mallacoota, but we believe we may have up to another 300 people to move from Mallacoota over the next few days.
More than 400 Army reservists have already been mobilised out of the 3,000 who received the compulsory call-out on the weekend. And from Canberra came an impassioned promise of help.
Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we will ensure the resilience and future of this country.
The Prime Minister's announced the government will commit $2 billion to rebuilding bushfire-ravaged towns over the next 2 years. The National Bushfire Recovery Agency will be responsible for rebuilding roads and infrastructure, mental health support, attracting tourists back to fire-devastated regions, rolling out 20 Service Australia pop-ups to help bushfire victims access services like Medicare and Centrelink. But those who've been affected by the bushfires say what's been available until now is far from enough.
I'm disgusted in the way that the government's handling it.
Robert Provenzale lives with his partner, toddler and 8-month-old baby in Bateman's Bay. They've been without power for a week and without an income for 2 since the fires stopped his work on the local bridge upgrade.
There's tens of thousands of families that are going to need some sort of income in the next few weeks or maybe even months.
Social media posts also paint a picture of life in the wake of the bushfires with no support. One mother, who's being discharged from Canberra Hospital with newborn twins, writes,
"We are not able to get home to Eden. If you have a unit available, let me know."
While this man's entire workplace was destroyed by the fires, he simply says,
"Let me know if anyone has any work."
Disasters of this nature throw up any number of extraordinary challenges, and some of them are very difficult to deal with.
While $2 billion sounds like a lot of money, the challenge for the government now is getting that to people who need to pay bills, feed their children and find a place to live.
Rain has been falling along the south coast of New South Wales, bringing some respite to firefighters and those who live in the area. But with dangerous conditions expected to return later this week, the showers are proving to be more of a hindrance than a help in some areas. An 8th person is now confirmed to have died during the fires and 1 person is still unaccounted for. Thousands of people without power and with food supplies and water running low. Tempers are fraying. Jonathan Hare reports from Eden on the state's south coast.
The Navy has arrived on the south coast. HMAS Adelaide sits in the bay just to the south of the town of Eden. But in the background, a reminder that this part of the world is still under threat. A local woodchip mill burns, taken over by the border fire.
When we were, off the coast and in the bay, the conditions with visibility were horrendous, and it truly brought forth, the intensity and the severity of the fires that were in the area.
The Navy has brought with it 300 tonnes of supplies.
Where we are now is normally the aircraft hangar. We converted it into Hotel Adelaide at the moment, ready to receive evacuees.
Officers are liaising with authorities on the ground to figure out where they're most needed.
The other thing that we have a capability of doing is, with our aircraft, is identifying those hotspots and identifying and doing damage assessments as well from the air.
But some locals are questioning if the Defence Force should have been called in earlier.
A bit late, really. Seriously, the armed forces should have been in place in August when this was all starting to unfold.
Jenny and Arthur Robb were evacuated from their home in nearby Kaya on Saturday. They're still unable to go home and there's no word on when this roadblock will be gone.
It's just an emotional roller coaster, really. You go from grief to anger to fear. You worry about your family.
The heavens have opened above Eden, but not enough rain has fallen to put the border fire out. Despite conditions, firefighters are working on.
We're here, so we thought we might as well do something. helping the people in town a little bit, maybe give them a little bit more confidence and, just help them on their way, but they've got a big job in front of them.
Locals here in Eden have been through a harrowing few days, under the threat of fire and under a blood orange or simply black sky. Some are still down here at the wharf, near the water. Others can't get home. In Bermagui, roads are beginning to reopen, but locals have to boil drinking water and there's still no power.
I want to acknowledge Essential. They're working around the clock to get the power back on. It's great that we're starting to see food trucks turn up into Bermagui.
But in the interim, frustration is growing.
If these politicians don't get off their arse and do something and lead, don't follow, lead.
Weeks into this crisis, patience is wearing thin.
Let's go to our reporter Helen Frost, who joins us from Rural Fire Service headquarters in Sydney. Helen, as we've been reporting, there's been another confirmed death. What can you tell us about that?
So it is a 71-year-old man who was last seen on his property on New Year's Eve. He was from Nerigunda, which is in the Eurobodalla Shire. That's near Maruya, and he was in the Badger Forest fire. So police and rescue teams were finally able to get in there today because their ground has only just been cleared for them to get through. And they found him between his property and his car. So we've also heard that a strike force has been set up in the area. It's called Strike Force Indara, and the police will be working to figure out exactly what the cause of the blaze was, how many stock losses, and to get all of that information together, but it could be a few days before we get any more detail. We're also hearing that they've prosecuted legal action, or will be, against about 180 people over bushfire-related incidents so far since everything began a few months ago.
Helen, bring us to the current conditions now. As we know, there was rain falling in parts of the state. I know people are rejoicing about the prospect. How's it looking out there right now?
So the conditions are a lot better. We've had good news for residents in Bega, Eden, Merimbula, Pambula, areas around there, and Bermagui as well, because they've been allowed to go back to their towns and to their homes. But this rain isn't enough to actually stop the fires or contain them, but it is enough to give the firefighters a bit of a break to actually work on these containment lines ahead of some strong conditions that are forecast from Friday. But we are seeing that there has been still around 3,000 firefighters in the field, and they're working on around 132 fires. That's around the whole state. They're working particularly around the Blue Mountains area, where we're expecting to see some high fire danger today and later into the rest of this week.
I understand you've spoken to a fire analyst about the situation. What did he tell you?
So we spoke to Laurence McCoy a bit earlier, and he was taking us through the fact that it hasn't been an unusual start. What's unusual is the number of times we've seen extreme fire conditions, and this is what he had to say a little bit earlier.
It's not so much that what we're seeing is different, it's the frequency, and so we're seeing this extreme fire behaviour repeatedly over the last few weeks. Whereas in previous seasons, we might only see it once or twice a year, maybe a handful of times. Whereas this year, we've seen it in consecutive weather events. So in terms of extreme fire behaviour, we're talking about perhaps these fire-induced thunderstorms, which are causing these fires to spread rapidly. They're causing extremely high-intensity fires, strong columns, enormous columns that are sending smoke into the stratosphere. And I guess, as I said, extreme fire behaviour.
So fire crews have been focusing on that Gospers Mountains fire, and what we're seeing at the moment is a 60-kilometre containment line that they're trying to build, and that's between Wentworth Falls and Glenbrook to try and protect all of the townships within that area. So that's something that's also unprecedented as well, is just the length of these containment lines that they're having to build as they try and protect towns into the future, because as we know, these fires aren't going to be stopped, many of them, by the firefighters. We will need significant rainfall to put them out.
Helen Frost reporting from Rural Fire Service headquarters in Sydney. Thank you. So while it's been confirmed 2 people died in last week's fires in Victoria, today there was some good news. The 4 who were unaccounted for have now been found, but the number of homes now confirmed to have been lost in that state sits at 200, with that number expected to rise to more than 300 when assessment teams complete their work. Tran has this report.
Hundreds of homes have been razed by Victoria's raging bushfires, and rain has brought some relief for all creatures, great and small. The cool change has also allowed many to see up close what they've lost, and for business owners who stayed to assess the long-term damage.
This is our third year of drought. What was tough is now disastrous.
76-year-old Rob Fraser also stayed to defend his home and B&B.
It was Third World War with explosions going on.
What was an inferno last week is now smoke shrouded and wet, but this drizzle is far from enough to douse the blazes still burning across Gippsland and the state's northeast.
To put this fire out, we would need something like 200 millimetres of water.
The conditions are also making some things harder. The Defence Force has joined firefighters on the ground, but the rain is delaying backburning. The earth is also more slippery for heavy machinery. The poor visibility cancelled air evacuations from Mallacoota today.
There's no point going out in the weather at the moment because, to be honest, we'd fly out there and then come back.
Which also happened on Saturday, when it was flames and smoke that prevented flights landing over the weekend. About 2,000 people have been rescued from Mallacoota by boat and air, but 300 people are still waiting to get out. The area of land burnt is staggering. More than 1.2 million hectares have already been ravaged, and authorities remain concerned these fires around Corryong could merge or link with blazes in New South Wales to create a mega blaze when temperatures rise later in the week. The devastation has become so much clearer here on the fireground, and to that end, the Victorian Government has announced it'll spend $50 million on a permanent bushfire recovery agency responsible for rebuilding schools, roads and communities, not only damaged by this fire, but future blazes.
We are going to see longer fire seasons, and we are going to see, we should just be honest about the fact we're going to see more and more fires, more and more damage.
And the recovery for everyone in the region will take years. But despite the devastation, many are committed to rebuilding.
So let's bring you up to date now on the latest fire conditions in New South Wales and Victoria. We're joined by Jonathan Hare in Eden on the New South Wales south coast, and Danny Tran is with us from Bairnsdale in Victoria's East Gippsland. Firstly, Jonathan, to you in Eden, what exactly is the Navy ship going to do in Eden?
So HMAS Adelaide, which is just to the south of where I am now in the bay around Eden. Basically, it's parked there at the moment as helicopters from its deck start doing reconnaissance missions. They're flying to locations to the west of where I am now, towns that are still being affected by bushfire. It's interesting, those helicopters can fly in bad conditions like the ones you're seeing around me now. They can also direct firefighters to where they need to go. They can also land on the ground or winch people up to safety if they need to be evacuated from the spot where they are now. So that's what the helicopters are doing. The naval officers have been travelling to Eden for most of the day by dinghy. They've been going there speaking with local authorities to assess exactly what they need from the Navy at this point. But as of yet, no supplies have been brought ashore. Now, it's been raining for most of the day. People have been allowed back into Eden. A lot of people have been coming to vantage points like this one to check out what's happening behind me, which is the local wood chip mill, which is still burning quite furiously. It's been burning most of the day, sending a lot of smoke into the air. Now, that's a local employer. We hear that a lot of people work at that place, so a lot of people really aren't happy to see it burning. If you zoom right in, you can see massive stockpiles of timber just on fire. As I mentioned, raining most of the day. There are meant to be thunderstorms coming later this week, which, of course, the lightning could cause further problems for firefighters in the coming days.
Jonathan here in Eden. Let's go to Danny Tran in Sarsfield, northeast of Bairnsdale. Danny, the evacuation orders have been lifted across the state. So what does that mean for residents from those fire-affected towns?
Jeremy, 76,000 people have been evacuated in fire zones, and the lifting of these orders means that some might finally get a chance to spend a night at home. They can go back, reassess the damage, perhaps look for some items that they might need. But let's be extremely clear. This is a declared destruction zone, and it's still dangerous and the situation is dynamic. Victoria's Emergency Services Minister Lisa Neville says people can come back slowly in safety, but they must be prepared to leave, because as temperatures rise next week, new evacuation orders can be issued for the same communities and even new communities. Now, we know that conditions at the moment are tough for firefighters. It doesn't really look like it's a fire zone here. It's been raining for the past 2 days. It's quite smoky, it's quite hazy, it's 14 degrees, and many people are going around here wearing winter jackets. But the rain has actually made it quite slippery and difficult for firefighters to get into spots. It's made it difficult to bring heavy machinery around, and the conditions are expected to get hotter later in the week, so it is really tough here for Victorian firefighters.
Danny Tran reporting from Victoria, and Jonathan here in Eden in New South Wales. Thank you. Well, thousands of homes across New South Wales are still without electricity after blazes damaged key infrastructure across the state. Some smaller towns have been without power since New Year's Eve. Teams are now using favourable weather to restore electricity and to ensure a stable energy supply. For more on the situation on the New South Wales South Coast, I'm joined by Scott Ryan from Endeavour Energy, live from Nowra. Scott Ryan, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Let's start with some good news, because I hear that the power is finally coming back on in parts of the South Coast that have had it for had the outage for almost a week now.
Yes, that's right, Jeremy. We've had teams out working hard all through the last few days, and today we made great inroads in restoring a backbone supply down to essential energy, and they are working through the night now to restore customers in the Batemans Bay and Mossy Point areas. That will get back about 15,000 customers.
So let's just be clear about exactly what your role is with Endeavour. You're the company that takes care of the poles and wires.
That's right, yes. And there are two areas that have been impacted. Endeavour Energy, which is the south coast from Nowra down to Baldy Point, and Essential Energy, which takes the supply from Kiola down to the Victorian border. And between the two companies, we've been working very hard on these southern New South Wales fires over the past few days to restore supply.
So how many people were affected at the peak of this disaster?
There were 57,000 people impacted at the start of it. This was the South Coast fires only, bear in mind, the more recent fires. We've now got that down to 27,000 customers, and with the work that Essential Energy is doing, helped by ourselves today, we'll see another 15,000 of those drop away.
So what have been the major roadblocks to you today, forgive the pun, but in terms of trying to get the power back on, what has been causing the problem and the delay?
Well, some of the challenges have been, as you say, literally roadblocks and getting safe access to the areas where we need to be. It's also been active fires and just scoping the amount of damage so that we can target the most effective response safely for our customers as well as for our staff.
Now take us through some of the key towns that you're in charge of. These are some of the worst hit areas of the fires in the past week. Manana is inside your area. How's the power supply looking there?
It's looking better. They're not on yet, but tomorrow we intend that they will be on. Same again for people in the Bendalong area. And we'll get our 3,000. In my franchise area, we have 3,000 customers still to connect. We'll get that number to about 300 by Wednesday evening.
Now, the Bendalong area, does that take in Lake Conjola or is that separate?
Yes, Lake Conjola, we're looking to get them back on supply tomorrow as well.
Fisherman's Paradise, Conjola Park?
Back tomorrow. And the only areas really for Wednesday will be parts of Yada Yada, Tapatali, Beewong, and also areas of Kangaroo Valley where there still are active fires burning and we haven't been able to get safe access to understand how much we have to repair.
So if people don't have power, what is your best advice to them about what to do?
We've been staying in contact with our customers, as have Essential Energy, through SMSs, through phoning them up and through social media. I'd encourage our customers to call us. We have a 24/7 phone line. We can understand them and give them the specific restoration activity for their area and help them and hopefully accommodate what their needs are.
And when you restore power, how stable is that supply?
Look, it's pretty stable. The challenges we've found is that this has been a rolling effect from the fires. I've had staff who've been working for several weeks in the Gospers Mountain area, in the Greenwattle Creek area, now down in the Currawang fire, and they're typically the same staff who've been shifting the defence around our franchise area. So they've been working long days, but they just keep backing up for the community, so I'm very proud of them.
Give us a sense of how great the scale of the damage is in terms of the power infrastructure and what it's going to take to actually get that back to some sort of, regular working function.
Yeah, well, we have been heavily hit. At Endeavour Energy, 45% of our franchise area has been burnt across. Now, that's also damaged a number of hundreds and hundreds of poles, many kilometres of power lines, And just in the south coast, we've lost 300 poles. For Essential Energy, which are from Kyola down south to the Victorian border, the last count I heard they had 600 poles that had been impacted and damaged. They're still patrolling their areas, and that's likely to grow even further. So a lot of damage.
And when we talk about the poles and wires, we're seeing pictures right now of some of these coming down onto property, onto roads. And I imagine that poses a danger not just to the workers, but to the residents who are looking to go back towards their properties as well.
Yes, it is. So our advice for our customers and members of the public is that if you see fallen mains, treat them as alive, stay at least 8 metres away from them, and contact your local power authority.
Do you have enough workers to do all this work? I mean, it just seems like almost an insurmountable task.
It's a big task. It's not insurmountable. We've been making great progress. So we are seeing thousands and thousands of customers being restored. As you can even see this evening, we'll get over 15,000 customers back just today. We are bringing our staff down from all over our franchise areas, down from Western Sydney, the mountains, the Hawkesbury, the Southern Highlands. We're also staying in close contact with our neighbouring utilities. So Essential Energy are helping us, we're helping them, Ausgrid are helping us. They're also helping Essential Energy. We're all staying very close and using each other's resources as best we can to meet this challenge.
How are you together, these various poles and wires company, Ausgrid, you mentioned Essential Energy, which also works in a neighbouring area along with Endeavour. How are you preparing for the rest of the bushfire season, bearing in mind that we're only just over halfway through it?
Yes, so we have been watching this bushfire season and being impacted by this bushfire season for some months now. We did prepare, we stockpiled on our poles. We've also been staying in close contact. I have often multiple times a week interactions with my counterparts, not just in New South Wales, but also Energy Queensland have been assisting me as well with equipment that we've needed in order to do this restoration. So we all stay very close and we dig deep when anybody is impacted.
Scott and Ryan from Endeavour Energy, it's good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, the reprieve in the weather, the rain has been falling, has allowed farmers to begin the devastating task of assessing their stock losses. Across Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia, the number of animals killed by these fires already exceeds 15,000 and is expected to climb much higher as veterinary teams move in to put down those animals that are too badly burnt to survive.
In the scorched paddocks of Australia's southeast, the nation's livestock and the farmers who care for them are suffering.
This is quite possibly the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
When fire ripped through Adelong near the base of the Snowy Mountains on Friday, it burned almost everything in its path. Today, Andrew Reynolds faced the gruesome task of assessing which of his stock could be saved and found 31 of his cattle had to be put down.
I haven't been impacted, from fire like that before, and, it would just be a terrible way to die.
Farmers are urgently digging pits to dispose of dead animals, and the federal government is providing 100 vets to urgently assess stock.
If they need euthanizing, we'll do that. If they need to record they need feed or water, we'll do that.
This map shows the number of cattle and sheep being farmed inside the massive firegrounds affecting the nation's southeast. As many as 2.3 million cattle and 8.6 million sheep will potentially be affected. That makes up 9% of the national herd and 12% of Australia's sheep flock. But the stock losses are just the beginning. For those animals that were evacuated or managed to survive, feed levels have been devastated, and dairy farmers have been pouring out thousands of litres of milk because trucks just can't get in to pick it up.
We've got obviously still a lot of road closures and there's difficulty getting transport around, both for the delivery of feed but also for the delivery of product back out.
The long-term implications for Australian farmers will stretch over many years. But Andrew Reynolds is just trying to get through today.
I might try to put on a happy face, but I was having a little cry in the corner occasionally. Don't worry about that.
For now, the future is difficult to see.
It's feared that nearly half the wildlife on Kangaroo Island in South Australia has been wiped out in the bushfires. Many rare species, including bees, birds and marsupials, could be near extinction, with their habitats changed beyond recognition. Casey Briggs reports from Kangaroo Island.
Peter Davis has had his business ravaged by fire.
We have a community spirit here on Kangaroo Island that is not burnable. It hurts. It hurts to see this, and I don't want anyone to go through this again.
He thinks he's lost up to 400 of his 1,000 beehives, and some are still under threat. But even those that have survived may not be able to produce honey.
If we can't get them onto a resource where there's flowers, where there's nectar and pollen for them, the queens will stop breeding and they will just decline in numbers.
The industry is still counting the losses, but already estimates a quarter of the island's hives are gone. And it can't be easily rebuilt. Bees can't be brought onto the quarantined island, as it's home to the most pure strain of Ligurian honeybee in the world. There are a lot of birds in the burnt-out trees here, more than we've seen in most of the hardest-hit areas. For wildlife, these bees and what's left of the honey might be one of their only sources of food. At the KI Wildlife Park, koalas are being nursed back to health, but it seems they're the lucky ones.
I'm guessing well over 50% of our koala population's gone.
It's estimated 50,000 live on the island, a rare population without chlamydia. But it's not just koalas the locals hold grave concern for.
Glossy black cockatoos, the habitat's gone. The Kangaroo Island dunnart, the habitat where they were only found that's wiped out.
Wildlife has always been one of KI's biggest drawcards, and despite the devastation, locals are begging people to make plans to visit soon.
Don't give up on Kangaroo Island, because we're not going to give up.
Firefighters across the country have been flooded with donations and care packages for fire-affected communities. Those resources are trickling into devastated areas where supplies are running low, but where millions of dollars in publicly raised funding will go is still being determined.
As burnt out and isolated communities along the New South Wales south coast become starved of supplies, help arrives by the truckload.
No, I think we're taking the bags of feed into the... We managed to fill the truck with clothing, toiletries, food, water, anything, non-perishable items, stock feed, hay, pellets, anything that they can use.
What we've seen over the last 3 weeks of the way that the fires have been through here, terrible.
They're hero convoys for towns desperate for provisions.
Supplies are getting a bit tough. We're going to be having to start fishing the river, I think.
We've had some more deliveries overnight of groceries, so up in the pavilion.
Just the essentials, tin food, milk, bread.
As well as the essentials, more than $55 million has been raised for the Rural Fire Service. It means the tightly government-funded resource is more cashed up than ever.
I think it's absolutely lovely. I think it's wonderful, and I think it reflects the best we've got in humanity.
But the RFS now needs to think carefully about how the funds are distributed.
Our challenge is to make sure that through that generosity, we spend that money wisely and effectively.
Exactly how is yet to be worked out, but it will be decided with advice from its members. In Victoria, emergency services have been so inundated with donations of goods, they're now asking for cash only.
It's so generous have people been that it's causing a big logistics challenge, trucks on the road, staff being diverted from other important activities.
So the community spirit here, it just warms my heart, it makes me cry, because everyone's just come together to help out people they don't know, people they've met once or twice at the pub, and it's amazing.
Acts of charity helping to make this long fire season endurable.